G'day, welcome back to the channel. What you're looking at is Michael Rollins. He has a really good channel on YouTube. He interviews a lot of really interesting and important people in the hobby. If you're not a subscriber to Michael's channel, go and subscribe now. It's really worth the investment. And I'm going to link to this video, the one you're looking at now, in the description of my video, so you know where to find him. So what am I making a video about? Well, today Michael decided to interview, or he obviously did it a few days ago, but this video is an interview with Kevin Morris from the FAA. Now, Kevin has fronted a number of times on YouTube and other social media platforms for the FAA to try and explain things, to try and get across the FAA message to the hobby, and full marks to Kevin for doing that. Kevin comes across as a very affable guy, very charming fellow. He's good looking, he's got a good turn of phrase, he's well turned out. Well, yeah, what's not to like about Kevin? And so he's probably the perfect man for this job. He inspires trust and you think he's an honest man. So I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt and hopefully just believe that he's been misinformed by the FAA in regards to what he said, not only in that first stream that I scrutinized, but in this one as well. Now, I did this video initially and it was an hour long, which was ridiculously long, far too long, and it was a little bit nitpicky because I went through every little thing and pulled it apart. I'm not going to do that. I don't need to do that. I just need to get you interested enough to go and watch Michael's video itself, and you scrutinize it. You look at it with a critical eye and see what you can find. See if you can find a lot more than I did. So we're just going to pull apart a few of the key things that Kevin has said to try and judge whether the FAA is being honest, ethical, upright, and transparent in its dealings with the community. Let's get into it. Okay, so let's start off by trying to work out what the FAA is trying to achieve here, and this is what Kevin has to say about that.
Do what we want to do, because again, many of us actually are out there operating drones, and a lot of us do fly FPV just like you folks do. We want to just make sure it's safe, and that the
Okay, first of all, Kevin says elsewhere in the video that he's never had goggles on. So when he says we fly FPV just like you do, it's not strictly true. They fly FPV with a screen on their camera drone. It's a totally different experience to flying FPV with goggles. It's not the immersive experience. So again, we see Kevin doesn't quite understand how our FPV perhaps is different to the normal FPV you'd get with a Phantom or a Maverick or whatever. But he said the word safety. They want safety. And this is a very important thing to remember throughout this video, because the rationale, the justification, the raison d'etre for the FAA is to provide safety for the national airspace, participants in aviation, and everybody else. Their goal is safety. That's why they exist. Safety must be the number one criteria, the number one goal of the FAA. So in this video, we're going to examine whether they're true to that goal, whether they are making things as safe as they can be. At this point in the video, Michael has just related a story where a drone flyer was assaulted, suffered broken bones as a result of an attack on him while he was flying his drone in a public place. And Mike's raising the question, well, you know, this is not very good. And under remote ID, we must, according to the rule, broadcast the position of the drone pilot when flying. And a lot of people, even in the initial submissions to the NPRM, a lot of people complained this was not good. This was not a good thing. We don't want to broadcast our position because it makes us vulnerable to all the Karens and even someone who just wants to steal your stuff. So Mike has related this incident and puts it over to Kevin to explain why they still have this need to broadcast the pilot's position for whatever reason. And let's listen to what Kevin says.
So, you know, with the remote ID and with this idea that, okay, well, as it stands right now, you're going to have to broadcast the location of the pilot. What is being done to promote the safety of the pilot, right? Because it's not just the drone that's dangerous. It's the people that the drone may be flying over as well.
right. That is a concern. First of all, it's a terrible story to hear something like that. My heart goes out to that individual and anybody that's been attacked in that manner. It's really a shame that that happens. But I'm glad you asked this because it's certainly something that's on a lot of people's mind. This is in fact brought up at the most recent Drone Advisory Committee meeting that we had a couple of months ago, and how are we looking at handling this? So from a legal standpoint, when something terrible and tragic like this happens, where somebody's assaulted physically or threatened or anything like that, that's well outside the scope of the FAA.
Right. Okay. At this stage, Kevin's just explained that this is terrible. It's horrible. We don't want it happening. But it's not our problem. It's not our fault. Nothing to do with us. It's the police should be dealing with this. This is an assault. We're the FAA. We don't deal with assaults. I don't buy into this. I think this is unrealistic. I think the FAA will be responsible for these attacks because they're the ones that are forcing people to broadcast their position while flying their drone. So to try and abdicate responsibility and say it's a matter for the police, I don't believe that is fair or realistic. But let's listen on.
To conduct any sort of enforcement or action. We're talking about criminal charges, and that is something that police departments, sheriffs, law enforcement are keenly trained to handle, engage, and respond to. So my recommendation is for anyone that's in a situation like that, try to de-escalate it, but call the police.
Okay, again, this is very naive assertions on the part of the FAA. Try and de-escalate the situation. Now, let's assume that someone's come and just walked up behind you and hit you over the head with an iron bar. You do not have the opportunity to de-escalate a situation like that. Let's imagine they've stolen your phone and your wallet. How do you call the police when you finally recover consciousness and find that all your stuff's been taken? This is a very naive, very unrealistic expectation from the FAA that, oh, don't worry, the police will come and save the day. It is not going to happen.
That they're to help you out because as much as I can sympathize or empathize, I should say, with you, the FAA can't do anything in those situations. So
that's true. The FAA can't do anything in those situations. Absolutely true. But the whole idea behind safety, especially in something like aviation, is to prevent bad things from happening. We have all these rules for drones and manned aircraft and all sorts of other things with the expectation they will help prevent bad things from happening. We don't just try and clean up the mess afterwards. We take active measures to mitigate the risk or manage the risk so as to reduce the likelihood of a bad thing happening. Yet in this particular situation with remote ID, the FAA has created a situation which actually increases the risk. It significantly increases the risk of bad things happening to the drone pilot, who is a participant in the aviation sector. This seems to fly in the face of the justification, the rationale, the raison d'etre for the FAA. They were created to make things safer, but by mandating that the drone operator's position is broadcast publicly when they're flying, they've done exactly the opposite. And if Taylor Brennan from RDQ is watching this video, you need to have a talk to Jonathan Ruprecht, your lawyer, and see whether perhaps this could be a path for challenging the remote ID bill, a remote ID rule. If it is contrary to the entire reason for the FAA existing, surely that must be grounds for challenging it. If it actually increases risk and doesn't reduce risk, it must be grounds for challenging that rule, one would think.
What are some of the things we can do to help prevent those types of situations? Because by the time the police get there, we're responding to something that's happening. So let's talk about how to prevent that something from happening. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so he acknowledges prevention is what should be happening. Now, how does the FAA consider they're going to prevent this when all they really have to do is just make sure that that pilot position is encrypted, not publicly available in the remote ID stream, but encrypted so it can only be accessed by authorized law enforcement officers, agents of the FAA, whatever, not the general public. It's a very simple thing to do, but for some reason, although elsewhere in this video, Kevin claims that the FAA listened to all those 53,000 submissions on the NPRM and responded by changing things, they obviously didn't listen to the people who felt really, really afraid for their safety as a result of this pilot's position being broadcast. They didn't listen to that at all. So it sort of makes you wonder, did they listen to it really, or they're just saying they listened? I don't think they really took a lot of notice of some of the submissions in that NPRM. But let's listen to how Kevin says the FAA is going to prevent bad things from happening.
Education is key. We have found through our Partnership for Safety program, through other IPP programs that we've had, where we discover that the more a community understands about drones, the more they see them as tools, as non-threatening, and not as a lot of media tends to paint them as their spot.
I have to stop him there. Because this actually makes me almost borderline angry. Kevin is now blaming the media. The media paints drones as bad. The media paints drones as evil. Why does the media do that? Why do they do that? Well, the media makes some stuff up. We know that the media makes up stuff, but they also publish a lot of stuff they're told by agencies like the FAA and the US government. And for years, they have been telling the media and the public, drones are a risk, drones are a threat to safety and security. And in fact, if we look at how much new regulation has been brought in to deal with the risk, the danger, the threat from drones, that's the message that's been sent. These are so dangerous, so risky, so threatening that we must regulate them more harshly than we have in the past. So it is the FAA that has created this illusion that drones are to be feared. They are the ones responsible for this paranoia within the public. They're the ones that have, pushing through this regulation, saying we must have more regulation to keep you people safe from drones. They're the ones that have created the problem, and now they're going to fix it through education. Let's find out how they're going to educate people.
Spying on you, and they're trying to peep in your windows or fly over your backyard. The more we can get people to understand the value of drones and understand the safety culture that's out there and understand how they fit into our economy and our industry, the more people will be accepting of drones. For a lot of people, drones are still new. As you probably know, Mike, when they fly overhead, they're not quiet and they sound very unique. I mean, some of them sound like you're about to be attacked by a swarm of bees, depending on the drone operating. So it absolutely grabs people's attention. It's typically a sound that they haven't heard before. Now this thing is hovering above them. It's got a camera, so they get frightened by it. We want to educate to eliminate that fright, that fear of drones, and for people to start seeing drones as a valuable asset to our aviation community. So education is absolutely key. We have a law enforcement assistance program within the FAA where we have people dedicated to working with law enforcement agencies around the United States to make sure that they're aware of the rules and the benefits, and that drones are here for good type mentality that we have at the FAA, so that they can get that into their local communities. We rely on our FAA safety team. We have over 200 drone pros, which are people that volunteer their.
Okay, now let me get this quite clear. Now, what's the population of the USA? I'm just off the top of my head, over 300 million people. These 300 million people need to be educated to the fact that drones are not the threat, the risk, the danger that the FAA has previously portrayed them to be. They've got to turn the tables around now when it suits them. And they've got 200 volunteers are going to educate 300 million people. I honestly don't think that's going to be too effective when you've got the media still reading from the hymn book that says drones are dangerous, drones are a threat, drones are a risk. No, this is not going to work. Honestly, if the FAA think this is going to work, I want some of what they're smoking, because it's really strong stuff.
I'm talking about community. I'm talking about their local community. So we're trying to do all this stuff up front so that we don't have those incidents. So the attacks aren't out of fear or confusion or ignorance or lack of knowledge or whatever is driving that person to be combative.
Now, again, this assumes that someone who's flying a drone is going to be attacked by somebody out of fear. Well, there's the Karens taken care of, but what about just the mugger, the criminal, the thief, someone who spots an opportunity to steal your watch, your wallet, your phone, your drone transmitter, all those things? Education is not going to change their behavior one jot. And I believe that is going to be a much more important issue than even the Karens. Even if you could actually get those 200 volunteers to educate 300 million people that drones are good, you're still going to have the people who spy your shiny stuff and they want it and they're just going to take it because you're distracted flying your drone. They've use their little app on their phone to find out exactly where you are. They come along with a big piece of wood, hit you over the head, take your gear. The FAA is not mitigating that risk at all in any way, shape or form. And I don't know about you, but I would not be happy with that. Now, what's coming up is the issue of remote ID and BVLOS. And this is where Kevin tried to pull the wool over our eyes in the previous stream when he said that, we need remote ID before we can do BVLOS. Let's have a listen to what he says now.
We completely understand the concern that people have with remote ID and identifying a pilot location, but remote ID is something that we need to move forward with safely, securely, and with community support in order to reach these goals of further integration. We want the FPV community to have beyond visual line of sight type.
No, as I said in my previous analysis of what Kevin's been telling us, remote ID does not give us a way to do safe BVLOS. Kevin is confusing remote ID with what we call electronic conspicuity. Now, electronic conspicuity is when a craft broadcasts its position to other aircraft so that you know where it is. Even if you can't see it, you know where it is. Remote ID is designed for enforcement. It reports the position of the craft and its operator to someone on the ground with a smartphone or a device that picks it up. Typically, law enforcement officer wants to know if that drone may be a threat to someone. He can look up and see, yes, it's operated by a registered person and they're standing over there. That's what remote ID is for. That serves very little purpose, in fact, no purpose in making BVLOS safe. To make BVLOS safe, you need to deconflict the airspace. That means making sure there are not going to be manned aircraft and drones occupying exactly the same point in space at exactly the same time, a collision. And you can't do that with remote ID. Kevin has previously told us that pilots will not have technology in their cockpits that enables them to receive remote ID broadcasts. And even if they could, the range of remote ID is so small as to be virtually useless in terms of collision avoidance. So to claim that we've got to have remote ID and we've got to know where the pilot is in order to give you guys BVLOS, no, it is a mistruth. It is not the truth. It is a lie. It is a blatant lie. I'm calling bullshit on this one again for the second time. And the fact that it's the second time implies to me that this is not a mistake. This is what the FAA wants us to believe. They want us to believe that if you put remote ID, you're going to have BVLOS. It's not going to happen. I can tell you now. Bookmark this video, come back and say I was wrong if I'm wrong, but I don't think I'm wrong. Now let's take a look at the issue of actually drones colliding with manned aircraft. This is a really important issue because we're being told it is a major cause for concern. So let's see what Kevin has to say about that.
In terms of actual incidents where we're talking about collision with aircraft, there have been some. There was one that was an Army Black Hawk helicopter in New York a number of years ago. So it's not to say that there hasn't been any, but there also hasn't been a lot. Okay. And so I think there are two avenues to look at that. There's one saying there hasn't been a lot, so we're doing everything right.
Okay, there hasn't been a lot because we're doing everything right. Now, if we analyze the figures, we'll see that people have been flying radio-controlled models and drones for a very long time. Most of that flying has been done under earlier rule sets, rules which had been in place for a long time under Section 3, the Section 336 exemption granted to the hobby by Congress, and it was safe. The rules worked. There were no major collisions. It wasn't a problem. So how does that justify the increasing level of regulation we're seeing now? If, as Kevin says, they were doing it right all those years ago, why change it? If it works, why fix it? That doesn't justify the quite significant increase in regulation we're seeing now. But he said there were two reasons. Let's look at the second one.
And the other one is there hasn't been a lot. We've been pretty lucky.
We've been pretty lucky. I love it when people say that. I love it when people try and say it's only a matter of time. We've just been lucky. Because, well, it shows they don't understand how risk is even calculated. Now, I have asked many times for the risk assessment from the CAA in New Zealand, from the FAA in the USA, from all the regulators. I've asked for a copy of their risk assessment, the document they've used to calculate the risks associated with drone use. They don't have them. And you might think, why not? Surely they must understand how to produce such a document. Surely such a document is essential to create rules that are proportionate to the level of risk that these craft represent. But they steadfastly refuse to produce a risk assessment. And I'll show you why. Let's go to the Googles. The Googles, this is a Google, and it tells us how to calculate risk. It's pretty straightforward, and risk is a very simple calculation. There's only two numbers involved in calculating risk. One of them is a likelihood, and the other is the severity. Sometimes they say a probability and consequence. It's the same sort of things. They often use different phrases, but basically it's the odds of something happening versus the outcome if that thing does happen. So we had Kevin saying that we'd been very lucky, and luck is inversely proportional to probability. That is to say, if there was a 1 in a million chance you could win the lottery, you'd have to be very lucky to win the lottery. But if there was a 999,999 chance you could win the lottery, then you don't need much luck at all. Your odds on to win. You're going to win because there's only one chance you won't win. So as you see, the lower the probability, the luckier you get in terms of avoiding something. So if we take likelihood as a number, and let's just work out how would we calculate likelihood in the case of drones colliding with manned aircraft? Well, if we took all the manned aircraft flights and all the drone flights together, that is a huge number, a massive number. And so if we then look at the number of actual evidenced collisions between drones and manned aircraft, that's a very small number. Now, if we were to divide them, we'd find that the likelihood is incredibly, incredibly small. Very, very tiny number. Likelihood is a very small number. So that's one half of the risk equation. Now we look at severity or consequence. What would happen if, even given the tiny little chance something could happen, if a plane hits a drone or a drone hits a plane, what happens? Well, we've already seen the outcomes of that. In all the evidenced cases to date, nobody has died. There has been some damage to the manned aircraft. The drone is usually destroyed, but we're more interested in the consequences to the manned aircraft and its occupants. And the results have been kind of moderate, kind of minimal. We've had, Kevin talks about the Black Hawk helicopter. It had a dent in the door. That's it. Nobody died. Nobody even got a broken fingernail. We've seen other cases around the world where drones have collided with aircraft and the damage has been relatively minor. It may be expensive, but it's relatively minor. So how do we put these two numbers together? Well, we multiply the likelihood, the very, very small number, the tiny number that is the probability of a drone colliding with an aircraft, by the severity or the consequences. And because these things aren't, the likelihood can be a number, it could be a one in so many chance, but severity, how do you do that? Well, they have a matrix. This is a typical risk severity matrix where your severity is gauged in 1 to 5. It's either insignificant, minor, moderate, major, or death. These are the consequences, the outcomes. And then you have the probability of the likelihood, which is rare, unlikely, possible, likely, or certain. So if you have a certainty that something is going to cause death, then that's a really high risk. That's a 25 number on the risk. But let's look at our drone versus manned aircraft situation. The cases when this happens are very rare, so we can accord that a number 1. It's very rare that a drone collides with a manned aircraft. And let's look at the outcome, the severity of the consequences. Well, minor to moderate. Minor to moderate is all we get. We've had minor scuffing and maybe some moderate damage to the aircraft, which might have required a bit of component replacement, so forth. No one's crashed. So I would say maximum of moderate to date. So when we look at the risk matrix, if we have a rare event, a probability of 1 and a consequence of 3, then the risk is 3 because we just multiply these numbers together. And if you look at the range of risks that this matrix represents, it's from 1 to 25. So if we've got a risk level 3, that's a very low risk. That's a very, very low risk in aviation terms. And that is why the regulators will not do the risk assessment, because the numbers they get show no justification for the level of regulation we're having to endure. There is no the regulations should be proportionate to the risk, and our risk is so small. The risk of drones is so small, they don't want to disclose that. They don't want to do these sums. They don't want to calculate it and say, goodness me, we don't need all these rules. Of course they don't, because it's not about safety. At the beginning of this video, Kevin said safety, and that is one of the FAA's priorities. It's not the number 1, because as we've seen, if it was number 1 priority, they would not be exposing drone operators to the very significant risk of being attacked by making them report their position when flying a drone with remote ID. So that blows their safety argument out of the water, as does this risk assessment and the proof that they're not doing their own risk assessments because they simply would betray the call for stronger regulations. They'd betray the justification they're using that it's all about safety. It's not. This matrix here proves it. The historical information to date proves it. And even if we have a situation where we say, well, the consequences of a drone colliding with a manned aircraft could be death. They could be the most severe thing possible. But because the probability is so rare, on our scale of 1 to 25 for risk, it's still only a 5. It's still only a very, very slight risk because the probability is so low. So however you calculate the numbers, the risk associated with the use of recreational multi-rotor drones and model aircraft is incredibly low. And the regulators, especially the FAA, don't want you to know that. That's why they're bullshitting you. So there we have it. I've pulled apart a few of the statements that Kevin has made, and I don't think he's changed his ways. I think the FAA is still not being totally honest, not being totally transparent with the people they're trying to influence, the people they're trying to regulate, the drone operators, the FPV flyers. We're not being told the truth. We're being misled deliberately. I think so. Why? Well, I think we know why. And if you watch this video, you'll find out that Kevin denies that this is about money, yet we see it is. We see it's about money. So as I say, go and watch the video. Now, what I was thinking is that I would like to talk to Kevin one-on-one without having, because Michael provided the questions ahead of time so that Kevin had an opportunity to produce his answers and make sure they were correct, which, as we've seen, they weren't anyway. But I would like to interview Kevin and interview him in a live situation. I won't provide my questions first because I'd like to see him give us some more truthful answers, not ones that have been carefully crafted behind the scenes to say one thing but really mean something else, which is weasel words. There's a lot of weasel words in this interview, and it's unfortunate. As I say, if the FAA wants to gain the respect and therefore the compliance of the FAA, of the FPV community, they've got to do a much better job. They've got to lift their game enormously and not tell us all these lies that they're feeding out to us, as I've enlightened you to a degree in this video. So what I'm suggesting is maybe we should have a three-way stream here, or a three-way interview where I will ask Kevin the hard questions and I won't take lies for an answer. I'll keep digging until we get to the truth of the matter. And Michael can be the referee because obviously Michael is a moderate person. He could mediate quite nicely, and he may need to step in if we have a bit of trouble between Kevin and myself. You never know. It could be good entertainment if nothing else. So tell us what you think. Go down to the comments section on this video. Hey, would you be in favor of that? Would you like to see me talking to the FAA man on man with Michael acting as the referee, the umpire, whatever, on the side and just calling us all into line if we get a bit out of shape? I think it'd be a brilliant idea. Much better than if I just interviewed him without any kind of referee in place. Tell me what you think. Go down, tell us all. And I hope you've taken the time to assimilate what I've said here, and I hope you'll take even more time to go and watch Michael's video all the way through and see all the other things which I initially spoke about, but which I'm just not going to mention now because I think I've covered the key points, the things that are important to me. But you need to look at all the other things that are mentioned, where Michael actually admits to flying above 400 feet to someone from the FAA. My goodness, what was he doing? But that's it. Thanks for watching, guys. Thanks to my Patreon supporters. You make it possible for me to make these videos, to keep searching for the truth, and to try and protect our hobby. And what can I say? Without you, the hobby would be not as nice a place. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.